My father didn't speak the language of I love you. He spoke in the language of work. He was a master weaver and a manual laborer who spent 30 years at the local shipyard. When I was a little girl, I remember his hands being strong and agile, capable of fixing anything from a broken doll to a leaky pipe. But when I was 12, a catastrophic accident at the yard changed everything. A heavy steel plate slipped, crushing his hands. He survived, but the surgeons couldn't save his dexterity. The man who lived to create was suddenly left with trembling, scarred hands that could barely hold a fork, let alone a weaving needle. The shipyard gave him a small settlement and let him go. We didn't fall into poverty, my father was too disciplined for that, but the light in his eyes went out. He took a job as a night watchman, a quiet, lonely role that required no manual skill. I grew up watching him sit on the porch, staring at his hands in the moonlight, a silent ghost of the craftsman he used to be. As I grew older, I misinterpreted his silence for coldness. I became a successful textile designer in the city, obsessed with the very craft he had lost. I wanted his praise, but he would only ever nod at my sketches and say, "It's good work, Sarah." I resented that he didn't share my passion. I thought he was bitter because I could do what he no longer could. By the time my wedding arrived, our relationship was a bridge of polite how are yous over an ocean of unspoken grief. I'd spent $5,000 on a designer wedding dress, a masterpiece of silk and lace. When I showed it to him, he just touched the hem with his scarred thumb and whispered, "A beautiful bride needs a beautiful heart more than a beautiful dress." I walked away, frustrated that he couldn't just tell me the dress was perfect. The morning of my wedding was a whirlwind of nerves and satin. My father knocked on the door of the bridal suite. He looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo, his hands tucked firmly into his pockets to hide their trembling. "I have something for you," he said. He placed a small, plain wooden box on the vanity. It looked weathered, like it had been handled every day for a lifetime. "I couldn't give you the world, Sarah, but I wanted you to have this." He left before I could open it. I assumed it was an old family heirloom or perhaps a piece of my mother's jewelry, but when I lifted the lid, the room seemed to go silent. Inside was a veil, but it wasn't a designer veil. It was a hand-woven masterpiece of such intricate detail that it looked like it was made of frozen light. The pattern was a series of delicate lilies, my mother's favorite flower, intertwined with small silver threads. Tucked under the veil was a small, handwritten note. The handwriting was shaky, the letters jagged and difficult to read. "For 20 years, I spent every hour of my night shifts learning how to use my hands again. I could only do 1 inch a month. My fingers wouldn't obey, but my heart wouldn't let go. I wanted to weave the prayer I had for you into something you could wear when you walked toward your future." I realized then that every night for 2 decades, while I thought he was just sitting in a guard shack, he was fighting a war against his own broken body. He wasn't bitter about my success. He was secretly working in the dark to contribute to it. The coldness I felt was actually the exhausted silence of a man who spent his every waking moment sacrificing his comfort to give me one final perfect gift. I took off the designer veil and replaced it with his. It was heavier, more substantial. It felt like his arms were around me. As I stood at the back of the church, the doors opened. My father was waiting there to walk me down the aisle. I looked at his hands, the scars, the trembling, and for the first time, I didn't see failure. I saw the most beautiful tools ever created. I leaned in and whispered, "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Dad." He gripped my arm, and for the first time since the accident, his hand didn't shake. He stood tall, not as a broken watchman, but as the master weaver he had always been. As we walked, I thought of the scripture from the New King James Version. "And above all things, have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins." 1 Peter 4:8. His love had covered all my resentment, all my misunderstanding, and all his pain. The wedding wasn't about the flowers or the expensive dress. It was about the realization that love isn't always a grand speech. Sometimes it's a 20-year struggle in a dark room. My father passed away 3 years later, but that veil is the centerpiece of my home today. I look at it whenever I feel overwhelmed, a reminder that nothing is truly broken if there is enough love to weave it back together. I didn't get a villain story or a revenge story. I got something better. I got the truth. We often spend our lives waiting for people to love us the way we want to be loved, that we miss the incredible way they're actually loving us. My father gave me my future, one shaky stitch at a time, and in the end, his hands were the strongest things I've